Hello and welcome to Ditching Hourly. I'm Jonathan Stark. Today I am joined by special guest Ed Kless to tell us a little bit about what's happening with Ron and him and their new endeavor, Threshold. But before we do that, before we jump into that, Ed, could you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do for folks who haven't heard the probably 3 episodes that you've been on previously?
Sure. And it's probably changed since I've been on last. Well, certainly has. I was for 20 years an employee of Sage, the software company. But in the last year or so, I've been working on my own thing. And then starting in January of this year with Ron, which is the entity is now called Threshold. As you mentioned, the website is thresholdnow.com. Got to get that out because it's a little bit different. But I really have been doing the same thing for the last 25 years, and that is helping people who do consulting in some capacity do that consulting better. And that has taken on many forms, whether it's project management or pricing. But it's really been about the art and practice of consulting for me, and hence why I tend to use the term meta consultant for myself, because I consult about consulting.
I feel you. Well, initially this interview, we set it up because I saw an announcement about Threshold and I was curious. I just really wanted to hear more. I'm always interested in what you guys are doing. It's always interesting and on the cutting edge. Other than TSOE, have you guys ever partnered up in a business sense? I don't even know.
Not in a formal business sense. Of course, we were both. Well, Ron was the founder of the VeriSage Institute, and then I was a senior fellow at that for almost 20 years as well. But other than we had done a couple of gigs together in the previous decades, but not under one roof. So that's the new part of this. But the reason why we did it, I think, is probably the most interesting piece, and that is because we are huge proponents and followers of Joe Pine, who 20 plus years ago wrote a book called The Experience Economy, which we have been citing for a long time, especially his thing, I'm sure we'll get into it, called The Progression of Economic Value, and its impact on the professions and society in general. But the really neat thing is that Joe, in the last, I guess, 18 months or so, has been threatening, I guess might be one way to put it, and is coming out with a book in February of 2026 called The Transformation Economy. And Joe's got a Substack that he's been sharing that you can subscribe to, read through the work that he's doing, even putting out chapters of the book as he's been writing them and asking for feedback from folks. And Ron has been a big contributor to that. In fact, Ron's quoted multiple times in the book with his book Time's Up. But it might be best, Jonathan, if we just do a revisit on this progression of economic value to explain it. Would that be okay?
Yeah, let's start there because I was also blown away by that when I read The Experience Economy, and I interviewed Joe with Rochelle Moulton on our podcast, and we both had a similar reaction to the book, which is like the last chapter should have been the whole book, or could have been the whole book, and the last chapter is the timing. It would have been too soon. I think it would have been too early, but we like the most important part about that book to me as a reader was I think it was the very last chapter, which was about transformation. I was like, oh yeah, this is the part that's for me. The rest of it was very interesting and so forth, but I didn't do that kind of business, but yes, let's go with that because I think it's a really, really good mental model.
Yeah, no, it is a fantastic one, and the idea is that we started out societally. I mean, this goes back 400,000 years of human history, right? We just extracted commodities from the land, whether wheat, eggs, what have you, and those are fungible, right? Yeah. In other words, I can have them, you can't. So they're just and they're individualistic as well. So if you wanted to, over time, to decommoditize commodities, what do? Well, what you do then is you make it into a good. You combine things together. You combine eggs and wheat together, and perhaps make bread or a cake. And so now you've created this thing called a cake, and that is a good. All right, well, what do we do now when your goods become a commodity? How do you decommoditize those? And the answer is, well, you wrap services around them. So let's continue on the cake example. And with the cake, you may have pre-made sheet cakes, and you walk into a grocery store and they say, write happy birthday Jonathan on it. So now you're creating this service that you're adding, which is the pre-made cake with happy birthday Jonathan on it. And those are intangible. So you're delivering services on top of that. All right, well, what happens when services then become commoditized? What do you do then? And this is what the experience economy was about. The idea is that you would then stage experiences. And the idea classically that's around cakes would be, Chuck E. Cheese,
Right.
the birthday party, where you would have your birthday party or your kid's birthday party at Chuck E. Cheese, and the cake was free; it was included,
Yeah.
right? Right.
Right.
It was pretty good cake, by the way. They did a pretty nice job with the cakes. But so that was that. So as part of the experience, and just to dwell a little bit on experience, I thought one of the better examples was when Joe Pine spoke at a Sage event, I guess close to 20 years ago. And he's the keynote presenter, and he wheels out onto the stage with him a gumball machine.
Okay.
All right. It was actually two gumball machines. The first one was the old standard style gumball machine where you go in, you put a nickel in, you turn the crank, and the gumball comes out. Right. Okay, so that's fine. Then the next one was this big, huge bulk of a machine that you put a quarter in, you turn the crank, and instead of just getting the gumball right away, it would go down this helix where it would, spin down and then deliver to the same slot where you would take the gum out and consume the gum. And he said, now this is a great example of the experience economy, because what you're doing is you're creating the experience of getting the gumball. Now, if you think about it from a service delivery perspective, you're doing two things. One, you're increasing the price by 5 times.
Yeah.
And two, you're making them wait longer for the gum.
Yeah. Seems bad on the surface.
Right, which seems bad on the surface, completely antithetical to what everyone would be telling you to do in a service-based economy. Speed it up, get it to them quicker, and do it at a cheaper price.
Yep.
Of course.
Right.
So, but if you create experiences around things, you can stage these experiences. He would say stage the experience. They become more memorable. So the kids coming out of the grocery store, and what are they doing? They're pulling their parents toward the gumball machine. Of course, this is all, young people have no idea what we're talking about, because I don't think I've seen a gumball machine of any type outside a grocery store in at least a decade, perhaps longer. But I think we can kind of catch up with that. Well, and as you said, in the last chapter of the book, The Experience Economy, Joe says, well, what's the next logical question is, well, when experiences become commoditized, what do you do? And he said, well, you guide transformations. You would then guide transformations, and that's aspirational. And as you said, this is, if you think about this, now, I don't know if that last chapter was in the first edition of the Experience Economy, because that goes back to 1998.
Yeah.
My guess is that was a chapter that was added either to the second or third edition based on feedback that he would get, which, of course, the next logical question is always, all right, well, if you're talking about experience, what would come next? Curiously, though, Jonathan, when we had Joe on our show, and we've had him on twice as well, I forget which time we asked him, okay, Joe, so what's after transformations? And his response was, well, that's not of this world. But I think what's really interesting about this notion of all of this progression of economic value is that in all of the progressions, the previous error is subsumed in the other. So let me explain what I mean. When we went back to making cakes, the delivery of just eggs and flour was subsumed. You didn't buy eggs and flour, you just bought the cake. When we moved up to the delivery of services, you bought the cake with happy birthday written on it. The cake was subsumed in it. There wasn't a different price. When you go to the Chuck E. Cheese, the experience subsumed the cake. The cake was, quote, free or thrown in or
Right.
included, however they wanted to structure it. So the lesson there is that it changes even how you differentiate between those two things. It changes the pricing power that you can have, because as you progress on the economic value, you can command a higher price for this stuff. Like I said, 5 times more for the gumball. But it's also getting a higher degree of needs to the customer. You're delivering on a higher and higher degree of needs. So when we now talk about transformations, Joe has done some more detailed thinking around this to the point where he says, okay, well, if that's the case, we need deeper thought about what are transformations. And he said all transformations are related to one of 4 things: becoming healthier, wealthier, wiser, or living with more purpose. What's really interesting about those things is that you don't, at least in theory, have to gin up demand for them,
Yeah,
unlike
they're
you
always
do for a
there.
product or service, because, right, they're always there. It's a part of the human condition,
Yeah.
right? He's also matched these words with different pairs. So, for example, he matches health with well being, and wealth with prosperity, and wisdom with understanding, and purpose with meaning. The first being what you deliver. So we deliver the on health, you deliver on wealth, you deliver on increasing your wisdom or purpose. But the result then is well-being or prosperity or understanding, right? So one is the means, the other is the ends, and he's incorporating those into the thinking process, which I think is really important. So all transformations are around one of these things. And just like the previous economic errors, the transformations subsume everything previous. So, yes, transformations will include the staging of experiences, perhaps even the delivery of goods, maybe even in the delivery of services, or in a crazy notion, perhaps even commodities in some way. Right. So, but they will all be incorporated into the offering that is known in as the transformation. And we won't think about those things as independent entities. Therefore, things like, and this is very near and dear to my heart because my background is project management, things like scope go away.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because a lot of this having been someone who operates in maybe early stage of the transformation economy. So I've been doing coaching for almost 10 years now
Mm-hmm.
and that sort of thing. And even before I was doing coaching for maybe, I don't know, 10 years before that, I was doing software projects, which almost always start with scope. Almost everybody you work with is all they want to talk about is scope. But since I was a value pricing proponent, I didn't care about that. I was like, I'll figure the scope out. You don't worry about that. You just tell me what you want to, what the outcome is, what result are you shooting for here? And then, I'm the bus driver. I'll drive the bus. You just tell me where you want to go. Well, bus is a bad example. Taxi,
Mm-hmm.
I'm the taxi driver. Uh, I'll drive. Keep your hands off the wheel. Just tell me where you want to end up, and I'll get you there. And for this much money. And if it takes me longer than I thought or shorter than I thought, whatever, that's the amount of money. You don't have to worry about that. So scope has always been something I would do last after
Mm-hmm.
pricing. So I would come up like, oh, this is the value of this thing, this result to this person. Here's a price that I'll set for it that's less than the value. And then how much scope do I want to commit to in my head to support this price, or vice versa? You like what scope does this price support?
Correct.
And so that was always, people would always be like, you're so weird. Like my clients would be like, this is okay. I mean, this sounds great. Like if you think you can get us closer to that destination, then for this amount of money, then fantastic. So this aligns. There's many alignments. There's tons of things that one just pops to mind. The scope specifically. So I'm going to throw you a curveball. Does Pine, or have you guys talked about how these sort of levels of economic prosperity map to sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs and the general stability of the economic situation? It's sort of meta.
Yeah, I mean, and look, this is always a challenge. It's been a while since I studied the actual details of Maslow, but the concept, we've got to be able to eat, drink, clothe ourselves, shelter, all of these things before we can meet these higher order needs, right?
Yep.
I think the way that I would think about it, and I'll not presume to speak either for Ron or for Joe, is to say that that's part of the subsumation process, right? Is that we're going to presume to a certain extent, maybe we can, that none of us are going to sleep on the street tonight. We all know where our next meal is coming, and this relates, I think, to something else that Ron and I have talked about, which is that the biggest, we think, most valuable form of human capital is actually social capital. Your grandmother said it this way: it's not what you know, it's who you know.
Mm-hmm.
And the who you know part is really important here, because if you think about this, Jonathan, if our businesses just took a sudden turn and we lost everything for some reason, AI was completely able to replace all of what we do instantaneously overnight.
Yep.
Well, we're probably not going to sleep on the street for quite some time, because there are people who are willing to at least take us in for a little bit.
Sure, yeah, I suppose.
Right? First of all, it'd be a long time before we lost the house. Second of all, even beyond that, we probably know enough people who would be willing to feed and clothe us to a certain thing. So I think those things are have to be assumed. I'm not sure if that's what you're getting at the question.
Kind of. Yeah, how much does it feels sort of, like society as a whole needs to be, wealth increase, wealth increase, wealth increase. And I'm not talking about the 1% type of wealth increase. I'm talking about overall,
Hmm.
you'll hear quotes like things were really bad for everyone, even the top of the society 500 years ago, let's say. And I'd rather be broke now than a king 500 years ago. That's actually true. I would rather be broke now than a king 500 years
Oh
ago.
yeah,
So it feels like it's very this whole the luxury to seek transformation seems like just that. It seems like a luxury. I wonder if maybe this is a conversation that only applies to the first world, or does it apply to emerging economies? I don't know. I mean, obviously, there's people all over the world listening to this. Is this like a first world phenomenon, or is it?
yeah. I mean, it's obviously a very deep and an interesting question. We have had on our show, I think twice, Magat Wade. And she is an entrepreneur who was born in Senegal. She lives in the United States. And now I think she's dual citizen. And her book called The Heart of a Cheetah is a magnificent read. And her personal goal is to create the first ever worldwide top 100 brand that comes out of Africa, because there is not an African brand that is in the top 100.
Okay.
The closest is probably South African's National Airlines. That'd be the closest, and it's
Okay.
pretty far down.
Hmm.
So she wants to create a brand. And look, don't get in this woman's way, because she is just. I don't doubt that she will at one day achieve this. But her belief is that the biggest problem with Africa right now is not the history. Well, the history of colonialism, but only because the current leadership inside most sub-Saharan African countries have continued to impose the laws of the colonialists on their own people, right? And she says, try opening a business in Senegal. Like, Jonathan, how long would it take for you and I to start up an entity? We could do it before the end of this podcast,
Yeah, here in the U.S.
right? In
Right.
the US, right? I think it's 6 months in Senegal. 6 months to do the exact same thing, to get your quote, your federal ID number or whatever the equivalent is, to say that you can begin to have a bank account,
Hmm.
right?
Right.
So you wonder if those are the things that are in the way, then what is getting in the way of wealth creation is the existing legislation,
Could be. That sounds
right?
like a good interview to
Yeah,
check out.
no, I
Yeah.
mean, she's very. It's very fascinating to think that stuff true. But back to your question on, is this something that is universal? I think it is, because ultimately, one of the other things that Ron and I do believe is that wealth is actually knowledge. Wealth is actually the application of knowledge. This
Hmm.
is a something that Thomas Sowell, the economist, talks about, where he says, look, the all of the resources that we have around us were here when the
Yeah.
Neanderthals were around,
Right.
right?
What's the difference?
What's
Yeah.
the difference? The difference is the application of human knowledge to the stuff.
Hmm.
That's what's created the MacBook Pro that I'm talking to you on, and the
Right.
webcam, and right,
Yeah.
all of these atoms, with probably the example was some trace meteorite, right,
Yeah.
stuff, inconsequential. All of these atoms were here. What changed was the application of knowledge to the atoms.
Hmm.
Well, if wealth is knowledge, then growth is learning,
Okay. I follow you. Yep.
right?
Hmm.
So if we continue to grow our learning, to learn more and more and more, we will become more and more wealthy. The other thing that's important here is that, and this is near and dear to both our hearts, time is not money, but money is time. And the reason why money is time is money is we get money for what we do for others, right? What it is. And we had some a really interesting two guests on our show twice, Gail Pooley and Marian Tupy, who wrote a book called Superabundance. There's a big popular book now called Abundance, but they already wrote the book 2 years ago called Superabundance. So they were they were kind of ahead of their time on this. And their concept is this: is how long did it take the average, let's call it unskilled laborer, to earn enough money to buy a pound of bananas in 1925? And say that answer was it took them 6 minutes to do that, to earn the 45 cents or whatever it was to buy the pound of bananas. Well, how long would it take today, the average unskilled laborer? And there's labor data going back centuries, and the answer is something like, well, it's 22 seconds.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that in that case, what we're doing is we're saying, what is the time equivalency of money? Because that's universal. What's really neat about measuring things this way is that you don't have to worry about inflation, because it's taken
Right.
out of the equation.
Bananas, right. Exactly. Because the bananas are probably cheaper. So.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and then that's the other part. So time is not money, but money is time. And then the last of the four things we talked about. So learning is growth, right? Wealth is knowledge. Money is time, and information is surprise.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. And that's the fourth component of this. Information is surprise. And what we mean by that is experimentation yields a surprise, and it's unexpected.
Right.
And profit is a definition of the unexpected, because if you really just needed the expected return, you would cash out, take all of your money, and put it in treasury bills. You'll earn 2%.
Yeah. Yeah.
You make a 2% profit.
Yeah.
And you don't have to worry about it. Right. But what we're saying is, no, we think we can do a better job at investing our resources, both our money and our time and all of this stuff, so that it will pay a larger return. And if it does, that's actually a surprise to us, because it's outside the norm. Just like in information theory, the surprise is the spike.
Yeah. And it's not guaranteed. It's not as guaranteed. Right.
That's right. So, but there's actually one more thing I want to talk about, because it's related to this, and it's related this concept of time back to the progression of economic value. And that is, if you think about it, in services, what customers were paying for was not your time, as you correctly identified. They were not paying for your time. They were paying for the time that you saved them. Because if they had tried to do the same thing that you were doing, it would have cost them, in quotes there, more of their time.
Right.
Right. So you were really saving them time. So the bizarre part in this whole, services economy is the professionals charge for their time. The reality is the customer doesn't care. Their time is irrelevant. What they care about is the time that's saving them, the customer. Right. So it's complete. If anybody should do the timesheet, it should be the customer.
Right. Exactly.
Right. So that's time saved. But this is interesting now. When we get to experiences.
Yeah.
Experiences are about time well spent. So in other words, when we do experiences, the customer wants to spend their time with us.
And as much of it as possible.
Exactly. And as much of it as possible. They want to have this face-to-face conversation, interaction with us, because they're getting more knowledge and insight from that. Okay. So that's the experiences. What transformations are, and I love this part. Transformations then flip this even to the highest level, which is after they have a conversation with you and I, Jonathan, then they go and say, I've got to think about what Jonathan had to say. And now I'm investing my time.
Yeah.
Even when Jonathan is not around.
Right.
Right. So that's the really cool part. So, and by the way, there was one level I left out, and this is the biggest sin we think in the economy today, and that is to waste your customers' time.
Oh my God. Yeah. Don't get me started. Don't get me started. My accountant. Oh, my accountant. Okay. So
what you don't see on the podcast is Jonathan is literally trying to stretch out his neck from the strain.
Exactly. So, okay. So this is tantalizing. So you're running across a bunch of huge ideas, frameworks for thinking about this stuff. Let's not get tactical, but let's zoom in a little bit and say, like, okay, so all of this stuff is sort of like you and Ron are discussing this stuff. It's coming up. You're thinking about it. What happens next? Like, how does that turn into what becomes threshold?
Yeah.
And what is threshold?
Well, Threshold is a business that Ron and I have started where we believe that we can help professionals, creators, entrepreneurs, guides, architects into this new economy where what they are doing is no longer just worried about these previous economic eras and providing even experiences, but providing transformations. So where they start focusing on the transformation. The transformation is always bringing someone or a group of people from one. It's not place. It's from A to B. Just think of it from A to B. And there's different even I think Joe calls them scale of change, and then the degree of change that you can have. So you can have something where there's a small change in scale and a small change in degree, and he would call that, or I think a refinement, right? Where you just so this would be somebody like who's going from being someone who drinks wine to say a wine enthusiast, somebody who wants to go and when they go to a nice high end steak restaurant, not to call the sommelier over, but say I can adequately pick out a wine that is well paired with what everybody is having for dinner.
Okay.
So that would be a refinement, but it is nonetheless it is a transformation. So that's would be this, but scale this all the way on up to the large to what I would call a metamorphosis, which is a big a change in kind and a big degree in scale. And this would be going from not having kids to having kids, right? That would be an example of an incredible a metamorphosis transformation because you cannot possibly, as much as you can try to explain to someone who doesn't have children, you cannot explain to them what it's actually like to have children until they have children.
Yeah, and it affects everything. So
Yeah,
it's not just like your dinners at Capital Grill. It's like everything.
everything.
Mhm.
Right. Right. So there's no way to explain that to people except for them to go through it and be
Mhm.
there as their guide. So the idea concept behind Threshold is we need to begin to help to guide transformations, if you will, of the transformers, right? Transform the transformers, these people who
Mhm.
are going to be providing these transformations. So they begin to adopt the language of transformation because, like you and the epiphany that you had when reading the last chapter of the book, and you said, yeah, this,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
We think that almost all professionals do this, but they just don't use the language of transformation.
Okay, we could debate this. I see what you're saying. I would say that I meet a lot of people who um okay, I guess the question is, can you actually transform someone by accident? I suppose so. Does that mean that you're in the business of transformation if you're like say an accountant? I don't I so I don't know if it matters to debate it at all, but I do I'm trying to think of like people I work with hundreds of people in, a group community type of situation, and there are people who don't get they don't immediately understand the clients are not buying your time thing. Like
Mm-hmm.
like they really deep down don't get that.
Right.
And it takes time for it to change. And so they're talking about everything in the wrong way, and they're not selling experiences. Almost nobody I work with thinks or is selling experiences. I mean, there is an experience to engaging with them, but that's not what the customer usually, almost with rare exceptions, that is not what the customer is buying. So I feel like our people, the professions that I typically work with, the ones that traditionally bill by the hour, are hopping from the service economy over to the transformation economy, and will
Mm-hmm.
probably never go through the experience stage. Does that map to your experience, or?
It could. I mean, it certainly could. Yes, you can clearly jump a level. You can go beyond the gumball machine, so to speak. Right. I'd have to think about that a little bit to see what the transformation is for the gumball machine
Yeah,
equivalent.
we haven't got a good metaphor yet, but if you think about it, just think about someone that you've coached or worked with, that
Yeah.
didn't get it, and then they did get it. When the light bulb finally went on. Uh,
Yes.
we don't need to answer this now, but I just think for people listening, it might be useful to know that you could skip a level, and that you know what I mean, that you don't have to go through the experience economy and turn yourself into.
You don't have to include necessarily experiences in your transformations, although you could. So let me give you a quick example. Say
Mhm.
say say Jonathan, in your practice, you do obviously one-on-one coaching,
Hmm.
which would be let's call that more quote service, as if it would classically defined, right? Is that you're providing this service, this conversation piece.
Hmm.
But if you were to include and have a conference of those where you would gather all of your people together, that's an
Sure.
experience,
Sure. Yes.
right?
Hmm.
So the same thing might be true with somebody who's maybe doing software projects. And let's just take my former employer, Sage. So yeah, Sage is providing a software product. But if they have an annual conference where they bring partners and customers together, which they do, well,
Hmm.
then that becomes an experience,
Yes.
right?
But they still charge for the software.
They still start charge for the software, but they also charge for the experience too, right?
But what if they only charge for the experience and the
Correct.
software was free? Yeah.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Or what if they began to look at this as a transformation, and
Hmm.
the transformation being, and here's a great example, going from, I think a good example of transformation is going from on-premises software to a cloud-based solution.
Hmm.
That is a company making a transformation,
Hmm.
because similar to, you can't explain to somebody what it's like not to have kids, you can't really fully explain to an organization who has always been classically on-premises software what the experience and what the transformation will be like when they are fully in the cloud,
Right.
right? They
Yes.
can't possibly know that. It's certainly not as profound as having kids,
No.
but it is similar from an analogy point of view,
Yep.
right?
Yeah, I've had that experience, like in the 2010s, 2015, around there, where I was explaining to a national restaurant chain CTO or CIO. It's like, no, I mean, we could just do this in AWS, no problem. And he was like, I just total disbelief, no concept, and spent millions to do it on prem instead of hundreds to do it on AWS. I was like,
Hmm.
okay, if you want to get that quote from IBM for the blade servers or whatever. But yeah, I totally agree that that would be a transformative
Yeah.
shift.
So again, as you correctly point out, this is the key: is, are you charging for the transformation,
Hmm.
right? Because correctly, what quote software companies should really do if they want to get into the transformation business is charge for the transformation. Is say the transformation is this, and
Yep,
all of the other stuff is subsumed.
it's free.
Yes, you're invited
Yep.
to our annual conference, and just come if you want to.
So what is that? That's a perfect segue. So how do you charge for transformation?
Yeah, this is the thing we're all still learning about.
Yeah, I wouldn't say
So,
I had this figured out.
yeah, no, I don't think anybody has this figured out. I think this is one of the things we're all trying to figure out together. Ron and I do believe that that the subscription model is the most likely candidate to emerge.
That makes a lot of sense. Hmm.
All right, because what we're doing now is we're not defining the scope. We're not defining. We're just saying we will help you in this transformation. We're going to guide this transformation. The first thing that we're going to have to do is sit down with you, and guess what? This is to have a conversation about, where are you now? Where do you need to be? Where do you want to be? Where do you think you can be?
Yep.
Right. And if we can help you do that, we're going to do this in any way possible, whether that's through conducting surveys, or whether that's writing reports, or whether that's us going out and doing our own research, or you doing your own research and
Yep.
us collaborating with you. Whatever we need to do to get that, we will do it. That's
Hmm.
included in the
Hmm.
transformation,
Yep.
right?
If you were, and I know you don't have this figured out, and neither do I. So let's brainstorm here.
Yeah, no, this is great.
If the right, so I've got a community. Most people are in it paid monthly, and the goal is to improve their business work. Basically, the way I summarize it is to work less, make more without hiring. And okay, so if that's the goal, then and you're into that, then this is a good place for you to go. The price can be very low because because it scales, right? So it makes sense for me to do it. But am I really charging for the transformation? No, I'm not. If I was really charging for the transformation, I would take like a percentage of their increased income or something.
Hmm.
So that it'd be more of a commission model or a pay what you want model.
Hmm. Tip, what we classically know as, to ensure performance. That's
Say that again.
a tip. TIP stands for, to ensure performance.
Is that what that stands for? Is that
And
your
that's the,
origin?
yeah, yeah. Hmm.
Oh, I did
Yep.
not know that.
Yep.
I was a waiter for many years and did not know that. Okay, so in theory, that would work. Create it just like value-based pricing does.
Mm-hmm.
It puts even more risk on the seller in this case.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, I presume comes more reward, generally
Right.
speaking. And I have over the years started to qualify some of my proclamations about who, for folks who are still doing projects and trying to go from cost based pricing to value based pricing. um, I have people often ask, like, oh, are there kinds of projects this is good for and kinds that are bad for? I'm like, well, it's more like if you know what you're doing, you're better off going with a value based price or even any fixed price, however you calculate it, than with hourly, if
Mm-hmm.
you know what you're doing. If you don't know what you're doing, you are, well, I think we could fight about this too, but if you don't know what you're doing, you're probably better off billing by the hour. Although I'll say, if you do start giving fixed prices and you don't know what you're doing, you're going to get a lot better a lot quicker than
Right.
if you didn't. So yeah, so if you know, if you're really good at what you're doing in a transformation model,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it quickly turns into like venture capital. Like very quickly turns into venture capital because it's like I'm going to either invest my time or money in the success of this thing, whether it's a transformation or whether it's you want to lower your golf handicap by 10 points,
Mm-hmm.
or you want to be the next unicorn in Silicon Valley. It's like if you're so good at helping people do that, well, put your time or money where your mouth is, and I'll cut you in on the success. Whatever, however that's measured. That seems like, I mean, it's
Well, it
is it,
works the other way too, because you interesting that you use the example of the golf handicap, because Joe Pine uses this exact example
yeah, I love this story.
where he says, I wanted to be a sub 10 handicap, and he explained to the golf pro that this is what he wanted, and we'd pay him, I don't know, $15,000 if he got him below 10. So if you think about what this now means, is now the golf pro is looking at Joe saying, does he have the capability of even getting there?
Yeah. Meanwhile, he's perfectly happy taking his money for 10 years by the session,
Uh huh.
even though he knows Joe's never going to reach a
Right.
sub 10. Right.
Right. So and that so it changes the nature of the relationship. And
Yeah.
look, I do think, and this is one thing Ron and I've been beating on for years. Yeah, most of this stuff is not scalable. It's not intended to be scalable.
Tease that out. What do you mean by that?
Yes, you can provide, and we even have a threshold. We have $150 a month offering which allows people to participate in some phone call. I mean, it's classic stuff. Can participate in
Yep.
some phone calls and have access to our content and classes and all kinds of things. We hope those people are potential guides that we will guide transformations in them, but that we're not selling them a transformation,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
If they want a transformation, that's in the bespoke area of our business, where we're going to be charge you on a monthly basis, just like you do, and it's going to be with this from A to B in mind. Where do you want to
Mm-hmm.
go from A to B,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
right?
Yep.
So I think that's exactly correct. But it's not that part of the business is not scalable, right? There's not going to be there's not going to be another Ed and Ron that we can bring on to say, oh, we have 10 people,
I see.
that we're now doing this, and we don't intend it to be. In fact, and we learned this from Geraldine Carter. Do you know Geraldine?
Yes, she's great.
Geraldine's concept, which we really love, is this notion of having a wait list,
Mm-hmm. Sure.
right? Let's go. Yeah, no, I'm not scalable. You have to wait for me.
I see what you mean. So scalable in like a head count kind of way.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I mean, there are things like, certifying coaches and
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm not the biggest fan, and look, there's nothing wrong with it per se. And I mean, it's increasing knowledge, so I'm always in favor of that. And Ron and I have always been about sharing our intellectual capital, because we feel like because it means we've got to replace it, and we've got to get better,
Right.
right?
Mm-hmm.
We've got to be constantly adding to our repertoire and our knowledge base, so that we can help people.
Yep.
And but it is there. There are certain people who are like, oh no, I'm going to slap a name on that and call it my intellectual capital, and if you use this phrase, I'm going to sue you. And you're just
Right,
like,
right, right,
okay,
right.
really?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I agree with you there. I'm not a huge fan of that model personally. It's not an approach I would take because it just sounds too litigious. The whole thing, it seems too like uh, like you just have to, you're just fighting the, compliance, like is everyone complying with the rules? And I don't, that's no fun.
Yeah, and did they have their logo and all that? And look,
Yeah,
it's a
yeah.
very successful model for a lot of people, and it has made other people successful. So again, I'm not just completely anti it, but I will say this, and this is something we learned from Peter Block, and
Hmm.
this is really profound. And you got to chew on this a while, and it's hard for me to really contemplate this long. He says, when you really think about it, once you professionalize care, it ceases to be care. Like, if you really, really care, if you genuinely, fully, completely care, do you need to be paid for that?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, my son is actually a freshman in college, and he calls his friends or whatever. He says, you know what fraternities are? Paid for friends.
Instant friends. Yes. Instant friend group. So, okay. So where did the block quote come from? What made you think of that? It's like scaling a business. I mean, so what do we turn into? Socrates and live in a barrel?
Right. I don't know. It's and is this where we're all headed once the artificially intelligent agents take over and we because I don't think that we're going to sip mai tais on the beach. I mean I just that's
No.
not where I'm thinking we're going. Look, I think that the capacity for human beings to figure out ways to help their other fellow humans is infinite.
Okay.
Right.
I like that.
We will never run out of ways to figure out how to serve one another. Whether or not there is a universal basic income that is going to allow us to do that because as a society we become so fabulously wealthy we don't even have to worry about it anymore, I don't know.
Hmm.
Right. I
Right.
mean, this is certainly what Gene Roddenberry saw in
Yeah.
Star Trek. And look, you could make the argument, as some have, that if AI reaches its full potential and we get to what's called super intelligence, that just quickly to define it, the concept of super intelligence is when a single intelligence becomes more knowledgeable than the entirety of all humans.
Hmm. Yep.
Right. Well, and if you buy into my wealth is knowledge,
Hmm.
and then we
Right.
have
Infinite
effectively
wealth.
infinite knowledge, then therefore we have infinite wealth. What does potentially that mean?
Yeah.
But I don't think that's going to mean that we're not going to be able to serve one another. I think there will, and we're seeing this now. We see echoes of this now in society. People who are who feel that they are not active contributors to society. There's a couple of books that are coming out that are calling, one of them by an atheist who's saying we've got to bring back. He makes the atheist argument for bringing back Christianity. Which and again he's more coming at it from a spiritual component. I mean, I think it was trying to remember the guy's name. He says everybody worships. David Foster Wallace, famous speech where that he gave at a commencement. He says everybody worships. The only choice you have as a human is what you worship, and you better be careful about what you choose because most of what's out there that you worship will eat you alive.
That's a good one.
Right.
So speaking, you just mentioned spiritual and worship and the atheist case for Christianity. Let's talk about this sort of manifesto document that you guys sent over prior to
Mm-hmm.
this interview. Let's talk about that a little bit. And there's a couple of things I pulled out that I'd love to drill into, but could you, what's, first of all, is the document public yet? Is this something that
It
we
is
can
not
point?
public as of we'll date this May
May
27th.
27th. Yeah.
Right. Our intention is to have it public in the next 2 weeks.
Hmm.
We do view it as something that will always be, as Walt Disney would say, plussed, so that there will be potentially amendments and changes to it. But we want to get it out in like the, I don't know, final draft. I don't know what you would call that,
Hmm.
but one that is presentable with, by the way, citations, because the document that we sent over to you is missing a lot of citations that we want to make as to who we got this stuff from. We want to
Hmm.
properly give credit where credit is due
Hmm.
for some of these things, including Joe Pine, by the way.
Yep. Yep.
But yeah, I mean, but I'm happy to talk about it because I think by the time this podcast gets out there, it will at least be pretty close to being readily available.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, but yeah, so feel free to ask me questions about it.
So, what's the purpose of having it? Why did you feel it was important to? Clearly, a lot of work's gone into it. So, what
Mm-hmm.
did you feel like was the purpose or the importance of spending time on that?
We alternated calling it a manifesto, a credo, an encyclical.
Hmm. Hmm.
We've ultimately settled, at least as of May 27th, on a revelation.
Hmm.
We think that Joe Pine is the one who's going to be really leading the way with the testament, if you will, about
Yep.
this, the book about this.
Yep.
But what we want to put a stake in the ground is saying is this is what we see as the vision for professions who want to move in this direction. So
Hmm.
we're putting this stake in the ground, establishing this beachhead that we are at this threshold, this liminal space, but
Yep.
that we will pass through over the course of the next few years from all of the previous forms of economic value to transformations.
Hmm.
So that's what this establishes.
All right. And you used a lot of terminology in it that's sort of it gave me the fire and brimstone senses.
Yeah, yeah,
um,
and we actually prefer and you said spiritual.
right.
We spiritual as opposed to religious. And
Hmm.
here's the distinction: when we say spiritual, we really mean non-material.
Oh, that's a really good definition. Okay.
You might quibble with it, but that's the way we view it.
No, I like it. And let me jump straight to a really practical point in the document about burnout. So, what do you guys have to say about burnout in there and the causes of burnout?
First, that it's not burnout. And we believe that it's been incorrectly diagnosed. And this is the great work of Wendy Dean, Dr. Wendy Dean, and her book "If I Betray These Words," which we strongly recommend people read. People can listen to our interview with her, but read the book. It's fantastic. And in fact, her I think it's moralinjury.com or .org, but she calls it moral injury. The difference between burnout and moral injury, that as Wendy Dean sees it and as we see it as well, is that in burnout it's almost blamed on the professional, that you worked too hard, you worked yourself too hard, and we don't think that that's what's happening. Most professionals are fine with hard work. They put themselves in accountant's case 5 years of school because it's you need 150 hours, but and certainly doctors were fine signing up for a lot of long hours and hard work. So that burnout can't be right. But where the moral injury takes place is when you are compelled by an outdated business model to act in a way that betrays your sense of duty, care, and your profession.
Yeah, there's a line in there. I think I'm paraphrasing, I'm sure, but it was something like doing what you were asked to do instead of what you know to be right, or something to that effect.
Yeah.
And I know that resonates with a lot of people that are listening to this show because you hear it all the time. The customers that prospect came in, they want me to do this, but what they really need is that. And like, how do I pivot them to understand that what they asked for isn't what they need?
Yep. Yep. And by the way, and those are examples of tools and techniques that have existed for years. The work of Peter Block, the work of Mahan Khalsa on what do you do? Well, you actually tell them, listen, I have a concern that you're telling me you need this, but as someone who is the outside professional, this is not what you need. It's maybe what you want, but it is not what you need. And I'm fearful that even if I give you what you need, what you say you want, it's going to make your situation worse.
Worse, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, I use the doctor thing all the time with people when I say, when you go into a sales conversation, be like a doctor. First, do no harm,
Mm-hmm.
diagnose the situation, find out where they want to be, not what they asked for. If you ask for a triple bypass, they're not going to just give it to you, right? So,
Nope.
yeah,
Not without doing their own research, not without diagnosing the situation. Because
right,
the mantra, and I heard this long before I encountered Wendy Dean, is prescription before diagnosis is malpractice.
right,
Right.
exactly. Yeah, I've heard Blair say that too.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah.
So,
But on this moral injury thing, I
yes,
do want to is moral injury is not the professional's fault. It's the outside systems problem, right? And you in the great work that you've been doing, which is ditch the billable hour. I don't know if you've ever done this exercise. I call it the nuclear exercise
okay,
because it blows up the room.
no,
Right.
never, no,
Picture yourself before a room of professionals, accountants, lawyers, architects, whoever. How many of you have ever filled out a timesheet? Every hand goes up. How many of you have ever not put down on the timesheet what actually happened? Either too few hours, which is more likely the case, or
Yeah.
too many hours, which is, and most of it's the former, right? They put down too few hours.
Yeah, they're
Why?
eating hours all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
Why? Because they don't want their boss to think they're an idiot, or they don't want the customer to think they're an idiot. Or so that's not burnout. That's moral injury, you see. Right?
Yeah.
Because now
I
you
did what
are.
I was told. I'm doing the rules. Yeah, I'm
Yes,
adhering to the rules.
and well, you're not adhering to the rules because you're supposed to put it on the timesheet.
That's what I
And
mean. Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
if you're supposed to put it on the timesheet, and then you know that if I put this on the timesheet, my boss is going to say I'm an idiot.
Why did this take so long? Why did this
Right,
take so long? Yeah.
right,
Right.
and so that's a systemic issue,
I agree.
right?
Yep. Yeah, I beat this drum all the time. I'm like, oh, who here has never lied on a timesheet? Every hand goes up. I'm like, have you ever eaten hours? Every hand goes up. I'm like, then
Yeah,
you lied on your timesheet. Yeah.
yeah, and you lied on your timesheet,
It's
plain and
just
simple.
difference of who you're lying to. So
Right.
like, right. So I mostly talk to people who are directly who would be working directly with a client and sending a timesheet to a client, not a boss. So I think that
Hmm.
brings different dynamics.
Yeah.
But to a client, it's a real direct. The client will definitely complain about it. I build hours. Years and
Hmm.
years ago, I did it, and it happened all the time. Why did it take so long to do the database import this week? Whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we could probably talk for hours. I know we're we're coming up against my these never last more than 60 minutes comments.
That's
But
quite all right. I'm good to go.
so what should we leave people with? What's the rallying cry here, that and where can they go to find out more about this? Where can they look for the revelation when it's available?
Hmm.
Probably LinkedIn. Where are you going to be
Yeah, well,
talking about that?
we're planning a pretty big marketing campaign around this because we want to get this out. We really want, and people such as yourselves, we're going to ask and encourage people to send them to your network, because this is partially movement, right? And this is where the continuing of the VeraSage tradition holds on. Ron started VeraSage as a think tank for the professions,
Hmm.
and we want to still have a component of threshold that think tank where there's a certain amount of the intellectual capital that is just available for people so that they can begin to absorb it. And look, we've had plenty of people who moved to value pricing or subscription pricing on their own without
Hmm.
any assistance, who
Yeah.
really get it and understand it, and we bless them
Yes.
to do that. I got no problem with them. Let's be fruitful and multiply. Right.
Yeah.
Right. But for people who need the extra added help or want the counsel, we want to be available for that as well.
Hmm.
But so the place to get this is going to be thresholdnow.com is the website. I'm sure the revelation will be prominently out there. My guess is going to be /revelation, but let's
Yeah.
just go to thresholdnow.com, and it will be out there in short order for people to take a look at and see. The call to action, though, is I think it's a time for all of us to maybe pause and reflect a little bit on the challenges that we're seeing, not just in the professions, but more societally, more broadly in society. I
Mm.
mean, I really think that there's a lot of things that are challenging the old order around
Yep.
these things.
Yep.
And I, including artificial intelligence, although we took pride in that it's not in the document.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know.
It doesn't need to be. And I think you made a point earlier about AI, that it's like, even if we had, even if it brought infinite wealth and everybody just was like, free food, UBI, whatever. So maybe everyone will be operating higher up Maslow's hierarchy of needs, closer toward the top, but there's still going to be, maybe we'll be monks or something, but that's probably
Well,
be an
and
improvement.
again, not necessarily religious, but spiritual, right? Right.
Right.
This notion that we want to have purpose. We want our lives to have purpose.
Right.
We don't want to think that it's all meaningless.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So,
So
and
yeah.
because of that, we will figure out a way to create that meaning, and the best way to create that meaning is in the service of others. This is
Yeah.
not a new concept.
Right. Right. Been around. All right. Well, that's a great place to leave it. So folks, you could check out thresholdnow.com, maybe /revelation. We'll see. But stay tuned to Ed's LinkedIn, and Ron, of course. Ron couldn't make it today, unfortunately, but I'm sure he's going to be talking about it as well. But Ed,
Yep.
thanks so much for doing this, and thanks for coming on today.
Truly my honor and pleasure, Jonathan. Really appreciate it.
All right, folks, that's it for this week. I'm Jonathan Stark, and I hope you join me again next time on Ditching Hourly. Bye.